Welcome to Next in Tech, an S&P Global podcast where the world of emerging tech lives. I'm your host, Eric Hanselman, Chief Analyst for Industry Research at S&P Global. And today, we're going to be heading into the next in our CEO series. And joining me today is Fransico Martin-Rayo. He's the co-founder and CEO of Helios AI, where he focused on building a more resilient and transparent global food system. A former avocado trader turned entrepreneur, Fransico has spent his career at the intersection of technology, trade, and climate adaptation, working to protect the world's food supply from the increasing volatility of climate change. Fransico holds an MPP from Harvard University, a Bachelor of Science in Economics from the Wharton School, and a BA in International Relations from the University of Pennsylvania. He's been quoted in the Financial Times, Nikkei Asia, Bloomberg, Fast Company, and Inc.com. And now we welcome him to the Next in Tech podcast. Fransico, it's great to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Well, we've been talking a lot about some of the technology behind AI, and we get into the details in terms of a lot of the nuts and bolts, infrastructure and implementation. But one of the things that I wanted to head into was really some of the applications that are doing meaningful work with AI. And I guess before we get too far into it, can you give us a little background in terms of what are the problems that Helios is trying to address?
Yeah, at its core, what Helios AI does is predicts the price and climate risk of agricultural commodities, 75 of them across 90 countries. That's more than anyone ever. We have about 6,000 price series and price forecasts on our way to 20,000 by the end of the year. But really, our whole ethos is to be able to work with the people who are buying and selling agricultural commodities so that you guys can get ahead of, a big price increase, or wait before you get a big price decrease so you can buy, or making sure that you're actually going to get that agricultural commodity that you need either in your ingredients or on your shelves.
So curious about leveraging AI. What are you thinking about the aspects of AI that have really changed what you're able to do around traditional machine learning? Because we think about, market predictions, tracking, availability. These are things that we've got a lot of good algorithmic machine learning approaches. But it seems like AI starts to open some new and interesting doors. Is this mostly the ability to work with bigger data sets? Is it more complex analysis? I'm curious what's AI done for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we think of the innovations and development of AI in two different ways. So one was it allows us to have built a platform that is able to predict these disruptions before they happen. And so what that means is you have better compute than ever before, cheaper compute. So you can start to ingest billions of data points. And even as a relatively small company, right, a lot less small than we were a few years ago, but relatively small, you're able to do this computing at a scale and cost that would have been impossible a few years ago. You have better algorithms than ever before, and so you can find those insights at a much more granular level and a much more interesting level that would have been possible before. And then you have better access to data than ever before. So, we take in 14 million individual locations. We're taking daily temperature, precipitation, cloud cover, wind speed, daily data. We have it for the past 20 years. We forecast it for the next 10 years. It's an enormous amount of data that wasn't even really available a few years ago. And so when you take those three things into account, more data, far cheaper compute, better algorithms, it really allows you to almost leap forward into a brand new world where you can start doing things like almost predicting the future, right? Predicting these disruptions months before they happen in a way that would have been impossible before. So that's a big part of why we exist. But the second part is, what does it look like for the customer? But I can come back to that.
Well, no, hey, let's dive into it. The challenge for so many, again, for our clients, what we see in a lot of our end user data, managing large data sets gets to be a challenge. Yeah. Sourcing those effectively, being able to actually get data that you can count on. I mean, you're talking about 14 million data points from a weather environment, ensuring that you've got reliable data and that you've actually got some level of trust within the data that you've got. That's one of those big challenges. Now, hopefully, weather data is something that you can get reasonable and reliable sources, but especially taking a look at commodities markets and what is a very dynamic environment in terms of where you can actually identify data for some of those things beyond the weather. That's a bit more challenging.
Yeah, and I mean it's more like 500 billion climate risk data points we have now, but we also include trade and supply data, economic data, geopolitical data, obviously all of the pricing nuances, right? So not just what's the price of tomato, that doesn't mean anything. What's the price of cherry tomatoes versus grape tomatoes versus Roma tomatoes in Spain versus Mexico? What's the seasonality, right? And so it is, I mean, our data engineering department is enormously talented at putting together, to your point, Eric, an enormously complex set of data. And if you look at it from the customer perspective, you go, oh my gosh, I mean, how do you even begin to look at insights from billions and billions and billions of data points? This is, to us, where the innovation of AI is even more exciting than in the background, where it used to be, if you're in a SaaS business like we are, like S&P is, you're creating these generic dashboards. Everybody kind of gets the same dashboard. You can customize it a little bit, but if you're the chief procurement officer for Coca-Cola, or you're a procurement analyst for Kroger, you're seeing kind of the same data, even though you need totally different insights, totally different information. And then you're getting these kind of reports, right? Everybody gets the same report. The beauty of artificial intelligence is you don't need to do that anymore. You can do custom insights at scale. So the chief procurement officer can get, whether it's using a Gen AI platform, whether it's written or videos or a specific dashboard, they can get the insights they care about in the time they care about in the format that is most useful to them. And the same is true for that procurement analyst at Kroger. And so what's really exciting about AI is it becomes a layer that gives you, a level of flexibility that didn't exist before to ingest that information and get those insights in the way that is most relevant to you, rather than having to go through this imperfect filter where, traditional SaaS companies were always trying to, almost go down to the mean. Well, what is the average amount of information that the average user needs that nobody's happy with? That to me is the most exciting part of this revolution.
Well, you raise a really important point there, which is especially being able to interrogate the data in ways that you couldn't with the typical, as you're saying, dashboard style interfaces, to be able to now, dig in and really delve much more deeply into the data itself and some of those relationships. Still, though, running at a pretty impressive scale. You mentioned geopolitics.
Yeah.
The weather seems like something that probably is a whole lot easier to predict than the geopolitical environment. I mean, because we do, from the S&P side, we track a lot of shipment data and such, but, things like, labor strikes in ports, other things that seem to be substantially less easily foreseeable. We certainly don't have a crystal ball, but I'm curious, how far do you look to go dig into those and look at what are really complicated problems to forecast?
Yeah. And I completely agree with it, right? I mean, I'll tell you a funny anecdote, then I'll tell you how we approach it. Over a weekend, when there still is, but there was a lot more tariff volatility, we built a tariff bot. And, the way it worked is it was an agent that would go out and look at different data sources that we had pointed it to so it wouldn't hallucinate. And then be able to answer questions like, hey, I'm importing X from Y. What does my new tariff regime look like? And over a particular weekend, the White House had a set of tariffs that were different than the customs website in the United States had, that was different than what the president had tweeted out. And so the tariff bot came back to us and said, I don't know which is the right answer, so I can't. I'm unable to answer the question in terms of what your new tariff regime will be like. But it just shows that even the
conflicting data in so many dimensions.
Exactly, right? And it shows even the most sophisticated technology needs a set of core data that it can rely on. And so that's never going to go away, right? I mean, garbage in, garbage out. But what is interesting is, we scrape 250,000 news sources globally every 15 minutes, right? Millions and millions of these news articles a day. And we have a set of complex LLMs that We'll look at the type of content and we'll categorize it, and then they'll see what the actual insights are. And one of the things that's really interesting is you can track certain things like, geopolitical instability, democratic instability, a democratic backsliding, based on the tone of the different articles, and sometimes based on the divergence in tone and wording, if you will, from state-sponsored publications than from independent publications. And so that has been just a really fascinating way to say, like, we would not have been able to do this before because we wouldn't have had access to all of these news articles, and we would not have been able to process them. It would have been too expensive. We wouldn't have had the algorithms that would have told you what the overall tenor, right, of the article was. But now that you can do all that, some of the new insights are, when the Turkish earthquake hit, you could see the divergence between national Turkish sources. We're talking about it as if it weren't a big deal, but all international sources were talking about it, that it was an absolute disaster. And you see that type of divergence in countries where they have less free press, for example, where for large crises, state-sponsored, or countries that have more state-sponsored publications, you see a larger divergence between the way they talk about these crises. And that's something that would have been impossible to track a few years ago, but now is one of the new inputs, to your point, into what everybody's trying to create is this crystal ball.
Well, those second order assessments are the things that I find fascinating. You're talking about both the divergence in content, but also being able to then look at sentiment on top of that. Look at not only what shifts in sentiment are, but divergence in sentiment. And that's really putting us into a place where we can make much more powerful insights in terms of where this fits. It's fascinating in terms of sort of where that heads. I'm curious for, in terms of your environment, that's a lot of computational work. Is this something, yes. How hard are you working at actually bounding this? The last couple episodes we've been talking about FinOps in AI. I would suspect that winds up being something that, as a product-based company, you've got to worry about as well.
We do, but I think two things that have been interesting. So my CTO, Eden, who came from Google, she'd been working on Palm before it became Gemini. She won the Abby Award. So Google have been wonderful partners for us since we started. And so they gave us a lot of credits at the beginning so that we could do a lot of this computation for free. And then, relatively quickly, we got to a commercial scale where we just had to start paying them, which was a good bet on their part, I would say. But what's been really interesting from the compute costs, my Gen AI costs have gone down 90% over the last 12 months in terms of the cost per token. And that, I've never seen a cost curve like that. And so it used to be incredibly expensive for me to run these LLMs, right, that are doing all the analysis on the articles. And then, whenever a customer would ask one of these LLMs, and we're using different ones in the background, you don't have to build your own LLM model. That's useless. You're paying 90% less per token. We are today than we were 12 months ago. And that's a combination of what the market is doing and our own ability to become much more efficient. But that makes it possible to really keep these costs not under control, but you end up with incredibly high margins in this new business, which makes it possible to continue to expand at scale and make really exciting investments in new features because your margins are, 80%, 85% instead of 30 or 40%.
So I'm going to invoke a overused concept. I mean, Jevons paradox, where we're getting more efficient, but yet we're using more. I mean, how many times have we been flogging this throughout the AI conversation all over? What's the extent to which you find that you're actively working at optimization? And is that something where, hey, at this point, a lot of this work is now inexpensive enough that you don't need to worry about it? Or are you actively looking at optimization? And I would bet at the same time you're also looking at model performance because we evolve models so rapidly. I'm curious about which sides, where do you put that focus in terms of where you're expending engineering resources to figure out, do you need to make it cheaper or are you primarily focusing on just making it better?
Our primary focus, I think, has always been on just making it better. How do we make it faster? How do we make it more valuable? How can we give you more data that is unique and important to you? it has gotten dramatically cheaper to do so also. But that has been, I'd say 80% of that has been a function of the market. 20% of that has been just our own optimization. Over last weekend, we pushed a new change that allowed us to reduce the time it took to update one of our pipelines from a few hours down by 80%. And so you're saving 80% of those compute costs. Your compute costs are relatively small for that particular pipeline, so it's not meaningful, but it is really helpful, right? And so that's, we'll always continue to make those improvements.
80% reductions. Wow.
Incredible. Yeah. One of the things that's been, obviously we're an AI company, and so we are as cutting edge as we can possibly be, not just in our product, but in the way we build these products. I haven't seen anything in terms of development and the evolution of these tools and the impact of these tools in the, since we started Helios, as much as I have in the last 2 months. I mean, we work very fast. We push out, as you can imagine, a lot of new features every quarter. We are going to hit all of our Q1 product milestones by the middle of February. And that is because of the embrace and advent of a whole new set of coding tools that had not reached kind of the technical capabilities that we are now seeing. I mean, as you can imagine, right, Eric, like our product roadmaps, the features we push out every quarter are pretty insane. We push out a lot of new features that our customers are asking for really fast, and yet we can go twice as fast, which is really remarkable.
Velocity begets velocity, right? And one of those things where if you take a look at just simple coding improvements, it's, again, one of the things that we see in our data as well, and particularly in a lot of the anecdotal conversations we have with clients. It is, one of the larger challenges is just ensuring that your tool ecosystem is keeping up with the advancements that are out there. That becomes a pretty significant task for your engineering teams as well.
Gosh, yeah. And it's impossible to always keep up, right? And so I think, especially for some of the listeners from, larger companies, right? So, it is a trade-off, right? If you're a larger company, you're less nimble almost always, but you have more impact. My recommendation is really focus on a couple of the verticals that matter most to you and dive really deep there. And so if you are, Google's probably a bad example, but they've done a really good job. I think 30 to 50% of their code is now AI made. I mean, you're seeing that across virtually every software company. And so what I would focus on, right, if you took S&P as an example, it's an insight and intelligence generation business, as I view it, right? And it's, where are the places that we can dive deep to make those insights and intelligence even more impactful and more helpful for our customers? How do they ingest it in the way they want to, in the times they want to, in the format that is most helpful to them? So each business has to make those trade-offs.
In terms of being more helpful to your clients, I'm curious, you're innovating tremendously rapidly. What about your clients? Because, again, in commodities, these are also environments that they may not be advancing quite so rapidly. Are they moving forward? When I first came to S&P, I was stunned to learn that we move a lot of our data via FTP because we've got clients who want to consume it that way.
Yeah.
And here we are in the midst of an agentic transition. I'm curious about your clients. Are they that much further ahead? And what do you wind up having to do in terms of ensuring that you're delivering data to them in ways that they can consume and integrate it?
Yeah. So we have a single platform, and then we put 4 different products on top of the platform. And each product is just a different way for people to consume the information. And so some folks are getting our information via an API. It's mostly hedge funds and some of the more sophisticated CPGs. You can go on, obviously, our SaaS platform, Commodity Track, and you can customize it and ask all these questions. We have an agentic platform called Horizon, where you can schedule, custom reports and ask all these questions and really think of it as an analyst. And then we send you reports and emails to your inbox. Of the 4, the product that people love the most is still the reports that go into their inbox, because that is the way they do business. And so if you saw any of these reports, you'd say, gosh, things haven't changed at all in the last 20 years. The difference is each one of our customers can now get a bespoke custom report about the places, regions, things that they care about that is entirely automated with GenAI. And so that, even though the outcome for your customer is they are ingesting the information the way they are most comfortable, the process is dramatically different. But then that allows you, back to the example with the Coca-Cola chief procurement officer versus the Kroger procurement analyst, that allows them to get the information that they need in the format of their preference in a way that would have been impossible even 2 years ago.
Getting right back down into being able to get so focused and so specific around the data to be able to do those kinds of much more granular perspectives than we've been able to do before. So do you encourage your clients to start to move forward and adapt? It's one of the conversations that we have an awful lot, as you can imagine. But business is going to adapt at the speed at which they're going to adapt.
Yeah, well, and it's always a carrot type mentality. One of the new
the carrot should be the usability of the data itself, right?
But that's exactly it, right? And one of the things that we recently added kind of a very supply chain focused way to look at the data we were giving folks, right? So it used to be, is this high risk or low risk or medium risk, et cetera. And now you tell us what you're buying, where you're buying it from, and for all of those different provinces, right? Whether it's thousands of them or just dozens of them, we tell you all good, or you really need to take action, or there's a warning, or you need to watch this. And that has really helped folks say, all right, there's real value in me going to the platform. I'm going to go check it as part of my regular cadence now and figure out where are the places that I need to really take action on. But again, right, it has to be that carrot of, we can give you stuff on the platform that we can't give you in the report. We can give you most of the stuff now in the report.
Well, and yeah, I guess you hope that things are going to move forward as people see more value, as they're able to engage in new ways. Yeah. Maybe we can hope that maybe we can sprinkle a little open claw on all this at some point. Maybe
a little bit, yeah.
Maybe that'll help. Who knows? We'll see.
Yeah, we should be nice to them. They'll be our overlords in a couple of years.
Yeah, I for one am more than happy to accept our robot overlords. So
let the
now
record
I'm on the
show,
record about that. Yeah. Well, Francisco, this has been great. I appreciate all of the insights and the background, and especially being able to dig into the real delivered value and some of the realities that we're starting to see. It's something that I think for our listeners is great to be able to take this to this level. But thank you very much.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
That is it for this episode of Next in Tech. Thanks to our audience for staying with us. And thanks to our production team, including Sophie Carr for unmutation and Kira Smith on the marketing and events teams. Please keep in mind that statements made by persons who are not S&P Global employees represent their own views and not necessarily the views of S&P Global. I hope you'll join us for our next episode, because there is always something next in tech.